It's indeed a tremendous pleasure for me to come and participate in this event where we are trying to coordinate our efforts as we try to reconstitute the fundamental foundations of our state building agenda here. As you know, for the last year and a half, if not more, the Somali government has been very active in a number of areas. So I would like to frame my remarks in a manner that paves the way for the expectations of this meeting and for the expectations of the inclusive politics front. As we recruit about 6,000 teachers with the hope that we will increase our access to education, quality of education, the reach and the scope of our education within the Somali landscape. As we recruit quite a number of health workers, from midwives and doctors, a lot of hospitals are getting support through country systems and through the utilization of development aid. As we take all those set of activities in the social front, within the economic sphere and financial management, as we completed the debt relief, which does not automatically mean that we will get into a greener pasture, but rather more work of reform, fiscal discipline, and prudent policies in terms of our budget, fiscal transfers, revenue generation. As we embark on a national effort to join regional economic bodies like the East African Economic Community, COMESA, and others, World Trade Organization, as Somalia tries to reassert itself within the regional sphere and the international arena to occupy its place, as we develop plans to better utilize our strategic location in the Red Sea area and the Indian Ocean to utilize our maritime resources and also to utilize our ports to provide services to our citizens and others in different parts of Africa. As we do all these things, it is very important that we also make sure that the rules of the game in this polity of ours are very much in place. And that is why the work that these line ministries do, that primarily are in two fronts, in the effort of democratization and good governance of the Somali state, and the federalization debate that should culminate into the completion of the Constitution, are in fact the most important aspects of our work. Because all these other gains in social development, human capital development, trade, security, I don't want to be very redundant talking about the security gains we're making, the liberation front, the stabilization agenda, the fight against Al-Shabaab, the arms embargo, all these things, as I mentioned in a little a page or two I've written about the constitutional review process, the reason why Somalia had arms embargo, or rather what we call arms restrictions, imposed on it by the UN, was not for any other reason, but for the sole reason that the Somali state in the past lacked the credibility, the legitimacy, and the capacity to guarantee its borders and the use of these weapons. So excessive weapons in Somalia could have been a source of trouble for the Somalis and for the neighbors. So all those efforts need to be anchored on a constitutional order, an agreed upon political system, i.e. the rules of the game must be put in place. Reflecting back on the journey of the Somalis in the last 30 years that we have taken to reconstitute the Somali state, to reconfigure and reestablish legitimate institutions for governance, I am compelled to reflect on what has transpired in the last 30 some years. There are only 2 agreements that have been forged in the last 30 years. The first one is that the Somali state is going to be a federal state. And that is mentioned on the first page and the cover of the Constitution. A federal and a democratic state. A debate that initially was laid down in 2000 and 2004, an era during which the first charter, the transitional charter, was put in place. A set of principles were agreed upon. A federal, democratic, constitutional state. 2000 to 2024 is a period of 24 years. So if we are going to say we're going to have an army of 40,000 personnel, and we don't have a completed constitution, we certainly will struggle in setting ourselves apart from other actors that are competing with the Somali state in terms of ruling the Somali people. What distinguishes the Somali government from its competitors internally and externally that try to assert influence on the Somali people is that the Somali government is supposed to be a legitimate actor, domestically and internationally. And gone are the days where one could arrive or get legitimacy through a whole host of means and mechanisms. In today's era, in today's Somalia, we can only earn legitimacy through a constitutionally enshrined principles, through elections, through agreed upon principles that are enshrined in the Constitution. So from 2000 to 2004, the transitional charter was put in place. In 2012, the provisional constitution was put in place. From 2012 to 2024, a period of 12 years, what has been put in place? Federal member states have come into being. In addition to Puntland, many other federal member states were formed. And the dialogue with Somaliland has been ongoing in a haphazard manner. And in fact, that dialogue would be more meaningful when there are rule-based political arrangements in southern Somalia. This place has to be attractive for the people of Somaliland to rejoin the Union and depart with their secessionist agenda. So it is within that framework that the work that the two-line ministries and many other institutions, including the Office of the Prime Minister, the President, and other government entities, must work towards political settlements, agreements, and a national debate. Why do I link the current work that is happening with the constitutional review process, democratization agenda, elections, and the federalization agenda? It is evident that all federal relations can be classified into 3 areas. Intergovernmental relations are of 3 categories, unless things have changed ever since I looked into them. The first one is federal relations are about legislative relations. There are a set of legal and regulatory arrangements and interactions that happen between the 2 various spheres of government. And then there are the administrative relations, and more importantly, maybe more attractive, is the fiscal relations. All those relations and interactions that would have a bearing on the availability of schooling for a kid in my village called Arigabo, which is in Sanaa, northern Somalia. It needs, the child there will benefit from the health policy relations and governance between Mogadishu and the regional entities. So we can neither generate resources from the international funds nor generate revenues for health or education without a legally agreed upon fiscal transfer mechanisms and delineation of responsibilities. So if we claim to be working on security, on social policy, on development, on trade, on investment, and not working on constitutional and political issues, we're doing a disservice to the Somali people. So I am extremely delighted that the parliament would soon initiate a debate, a national debate, a long overdue debate for the Somali public to think about, reflect on the set of possible options. And ladies and gentlemen, the type of electoral system that Somalia would choose is not something based on rocket science. There are only a set of possible options, either a majoritarian electoral system or a proportional one. And there are different variants in the two. So Somalia is not located in Mars. It's part of this world in which hundreds of countries practice democracy in its different variants, and around 30 to 40 countries are some type of a federation. So we'll have to draw on inspiration from them and base it on our context. That debate should trickle down to the kitchen table of the Somali household, to the civil society, to the intellectuals. How do we settle the debate? What are the mechanisms? When do we reach a referendum is a different procedural arrangement. But that is where we are going down. So in the coming months, there will be a lot of burden on the shoulders of those members of the executive that are working on these issues. And I think reconciliation, that Minister Fiqi is responsible for his ministry, dialogue, discussions, and deliberations are going to be the fountain for political discourse in Somalia. A discourse that is pursuing a principle of collective goals and common aspirations, and not the monopolization of politics or the attachment to a parochial, narrowly defined interests by the one or the few. Thank you very much.